wrong, Teddy. You pretty much taught all of the courses in our program,
No,
right?
not nearly.
I mean, come on. So, and every time I teach a course, I usually, for me, Teddy is a to-go person. I usually go to her and say, Teddy, I'm teaching this course. Have you taught this course? If she says yes, then I'm like, okay, here's my USB, you know. Can I get whatever you did in that class so that, into my computer so that I can learn from you? So we actually learn from each other, and, you know, she guides many new faculty members to teach well and do well in their teachings. So, and also in terms of service, I mean, she's done a lot of service to the field and also university, and also particularly to TESOL students. I mean, most of the people who are here, right? I mean, you can't see. I mean, you know, people connected from Chicago, from Philadelphia, from Arizona, and, you know, from different parts of the world. I mean, because of her extensive service to the field, also to students. So that's why we're here. And in fact, it's 8 a.m. in Chicago right now, and she's doing service to the Uzbek community, specifically to English language teachers in Uzbekistan. So that's how, you know, what it shows that, you know, about Teddy's service to the field and to the university in general. And yeah, without any further ado, I would like to give the floor to Dr. Teddy Bofman, and her talk today will be vocabulary instruction, specifically designed for the Mentor Hub and Mentor Hub members and whoever is interested in. And I'm just going to be here sitting and taking notes or whatever is happening in the chat. Teddy, the stage is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm really thrilled to be doing this. It's quite an honor. I wish I were in Uzbekistan doing this, but can't have everything. For my new friends from Uzbekistan, thank you very much for joining us. And for my old friends from Northeastern, I'm just thrilled to see you. That makes it very special also, very special. As, well, first of all, let me say thank you to Nadira and Beck for setting this up. I'm deeply grateful to you. And whenever I give a talk on vocabulary, I always like to say thank you to the student who really set me on this path years ago, Paul Prez, who taught me so much about what I know about vocabulary. As you probably have gathered already, if you were in at the beginning, I'm not real good with computers, so you guys may have to help me along a little bit if things aren't working out. I'm a newbie to this, so I ask your patience. I believe that this is being recorded and will be put on YouTube. Is that correct? And that the PowerPoint will be available. So if you just want to sit back and think about it, that's fine too. For those of you who've had me in class, you know this stuff, it's reviewed. All right, so in the past, when I was a graduate student, vocabulary instruction was pretty much ignored. And we now know that it's really, really important. So I want to start out with a few thoughts about it before we get into the heart of the issue. Macaro, one of the big names in language acquisition, says that vocabulary learning is a separate structured activity remarkably lacking from foreign language courses. For a long time, we just didn't teach vocabulary. People just said, well, you learn it. L2 learners, people who are learning a second language, think of vocabulary as the major factor affecting their writing. To a second language learner, vocabulary is a huge piece of the issue. We know that a relationship exists between the richness of a person's vocabulary and writing, between their language proficiency and how a rater assesses the quality of their writing. For many years, I read the entrance exams at Northeastern, the writing samples, and the people who got the highest ratings were the people who wrote well. It's very important. Research shows that your knowledge of vocabulary correlates very strongly with reading comprehension more than all the other factors. Not that the other factors aren't important, but vocabulary too is very important. Knowledge of syntax matters. Knowledge of morphology matters. Knowledge of strategies in reading matter, but vocabulary is really important. And the more vocabulary you know, the more you can learn, because it's a tool for learning. So what do we know when we know a word? What does it mean to know a word? Well, you have to know the pronunciation. Is the word learned or learned? There are two words in English. You have to know which way to pronounce it. Learned, the past tense verb, learned, it's an adjective. You need to know the spelling. You need to know the basic meaning, sometimes called the core meaning. So the word approach basically means to come closer to somebody. But it has other meanings as well. You could ask me, what's your approach to learning vocabulary? How do you do it? It's a related meaning. You need to know the grammar that's associated with words. Words have grammar. That's not the way we looked at it when I was in graduate school, but now we know that there's a lot of grammatical information that we need to know about a word. So for example, we say interested in, not interested by or not interested at, but interested in. We need to know the connotation, the emotional, cultural feeling of a word. So if you say to somebody, if you describe somebody as slender, that's a compliment. It means thin and kind of elegant. But if you say scrawny, it also means thin, but it means sickly and not very healthy. And it's not a good word. You don't want to be considered scrawny. You need to know collocations, and we're going to talk about collocations this morning if you don't know the word. It's how words come together, what words join together. And you need to know the usage of words. Is the word formal or informal? I'm exhausted is a fairly formal word. I'm tired is a little less formal. I'm pooped is slang. They all mean the same thing, but they're used in different ways, different levels of formality. Some words are used in certain geographical areas. For example, in Britain, they say lorry. In the United States, we say truck, or lift for elevator. So geographical usage matters. We need to know, for example, certain words in a discipline. If I say adagio, that's a word that's used in music, okay? Other people who don't know much about music may not know the word. So all of this is information that's a breadth of knowledge, a depth of knowledge. It's not only is it important to know a lot of words, it's very important to have a lot of depth of understanding of how a word really works. So for example, we know that words can have many meanings. You don't want to teach all the meanings at once, but eventually over time, you hope that your learners will learn these various meanings. So if I said fine, what does fine mean? Well, if you do a good job, I can say to you, gee, you did a fine job. I'm really proud of you. If I ask you, how are you? Fine, thank you, means I feel well. Do you think I'm right? Fine, I agree, yes. Would you please do this? Fine. Okay, but I don't like it. I've changed only my intonation. It changes the meaning entirely. If we describe something as fine, it can mean small or delicate, such as fine china or a fine piece of silk or fine hair. A fine, now it's a noun, it's a monetary punishment that somebody pays. Like in this country, you might pay a fine at the library if you don't return your books, or a parking fine if your car is parked illegally. And to fine somebody, now it's a verb, it means to punish somebody by ordering them to pay money. So when a student says, oh, I know the word, well, maybe yes, maybe no. There's always more to learn about the word. So let's talk about that word I used earlier, collocations. A famous linguist, Paul Nation, called collocations the company a word keeps. Words come together in a very in patterned ways. Now, as you probably know, I do not speak Uzbek, so forgive my pronunciation here. But if I said Yaxhe Yozlegan Kitob, means a well-written book. That sounds, aside from my pronunciation, that sounds right, doesn't it? It's something you could hear people saying. Or Badi Kitob, a book of fiction. Or Mazmunli Kitob, an important book, a significant piece of work, or Kop Tirajli Kitob, a book that's printed in large quantities. All of that sounds good. These are words that collocate with the word kitob, book. Okay, these are words that come together and sound natural to a native speaker. But what about these? This is for the Uzbek audience. I don't think most of my students would know these words. If I said Zerikan Ktob, that sounds odd.
No.
You just don't say that. Mazali Ktob, that sounds strange too, doesn't it? Or Samarali Ktob, that sounds weird. Those words don't collocate. This is knowledge that a native speaker of a language has that non-native speakers have to learn if they're lucky enough. Let's look at this in English. If I say brush, it collocates with your teeth. You brush your teeth. In English, we don't say you clean your teeth, or well, you don't say you clean your teeth. You say brush your teeth. You make your bed. You do your homework. These are all standard collocations, and they differ culture by culture. All languages and cultures do it their own way. So if I'm teaching the word brush, I might teach my students, what are some of the things that we brush? We brush our teeth, we brush our hair. Or if I'm teaching the word teeth, I might teach them, you brush your teeth, okay? You do your homework. You don't write your homework, you do your homework. These are just strong collocations in English. Let's try these. Rainy collocates with, anybody want to shout it out? Unmute and shout. Rainy
Day.
day. There you go. Thank you. Loud.
Noise.
Noise. Academic. Essay. You got it. Those are good collocations in English. Now here's a word like make. There are certain words in any language that collocate with many, many, many words. Make, do, take, have are examples of these words that almost don't have a meaning into themselves. They have a meaning in their collocation. So in English, we say, you make your bed, you make a cake, you make breakfast or lunch or dinner, you make a mess, you make trouble, you make a plan. If you know old-fashioned slang in English, you can say, I make whoopee. Make your bed, that's odd. We used to think of make, they used to describe it as creating something from nothing. Well, you're certainly not creating your bed every time you make it. That's just, it's a collocation. It's got its own meaning. And it's actually kind of, there's grammar to it as well as kind of lexicon. Now, it's important when we think about language to think about chunks of language. So for example, if I say, I ran into an old friend recently, you guys see a little chunk in there? An old friend? Take a minute and look at these sentences, and then we'll go through them. See if you can find at least one chunk in each of these sentences, and then we'll go through this together. All right, let's look. An old friend. I ran into an old friend recently. Our students need to know that phrase, an old friend, as if it were just automatic. We went to a restaurant and had a cup of tea, a cup of tea, a cup of coffee. Those words collocate. And again, in a different language, it might be a different word, a glass of tea in some cultures, but here it's usually a cup of tea. We had a fine time. Fine time is a collocation. Afterwards, we took a walk in the park. To take a walk. That's collocation. It's a chunk that goes together. In the park is also, actually. We talked about our families and our jobs. To talk about something, and notice, talk and about don't come right next to each other. There's other words in between. It's discontinuous, but it's still a collocation. It's a good collocation to talk about something. When it was time to leave, I felt sad. Time to leave. It's a collocation. It's time to leave. It's time to go. I feel sad. I felt sad. We made a plan to meet again in the near future. To make a plan, that's a good collocation. Make a plan. Or in the future, in the near future. So, you can stop me, by the way, at any time. You can write questions in the chat. How many words do we need to know? People always ask that. And that's a tough question. I like to think in terms of percentages. So what I want you to do is read this passage. And don't cry if you don't understand everything, because I assure you, you won't. Would anybody like to take a test on what's written here? I don't think so. Most of you, matter of fact, I bet all of you don't really know what we're talking about here, because I put in lots of nonsense words. I made up words, okay? Mm-hmm. You know about 80% of this vocabulary. 80% isn't enough. If you know 80%, you're going to be lost. What about this one? Try reading this paragraph. All right, you get an idea at least. Can anybody come tell me what we're talking about? Just a word or two? Anybody want to shout out?
Sleep.
Unmute and what was that?
Sleep.
Sleep and dreaming and language. So you know they're talking about something about the language we dream in. You know 95% of the words in this paragraph. That's just barely enough. Think about all the reading you have done in your lifetime in a foreign language, whether the language be English or another language. Even knowing 95% of the words, this is hard. So how many words do we need to know? To understand a text minimally, maybe to get a C, a very mediocre grade on the test, you need to know at least 95% of the words, and then you're not going to do so well on the test. To really understand a text and to read it comfortably, you need to understand at least 98% of the words on the page. It's not the way we tend to teach, but it's the way we should be teaching. When you say to a student, oh, just sit down and read for pleasure, it wasn't pleasurable to read this paragraph. You didn't know what I was talking about. And of course, I didn't either, because I made up the words. All right. So the next thing to think about is, how do linguists characterize words? Or rather, categorize words. Well, some important research was done has been done over the years. A man named Michael West in 1953 put together something called the General Service List, or the GSL. This was in the days before we used computers regularly, as you realize. What he put together were the words that he considered most widely useful and frequently used. And 1953 was a long time ago. He did not have the word computer in there, but he did have the word tailor and typewriter. So, it would change a little bit. There's actually an updated version of this now, the new General Service List. He put together a list of 2,000 word families. A word family is a word in all its different forms, like run, ran, running. The notion of a word is a hard word to understand. His list comprises about 80% of an average academic textbook. So if you know all 2,000 words, you still don't know enough to read your textbooks. By the way, if you're interested in seeing what the GSL looks like, You can Google it and you'll see the entire list. I've printed it up and I use it all the time, although by now I sort of have a lot of it in my head. Here are some examples of these very easy high frequency words. The, of, and from. Those are words related to grammar. There's lots of those grammar words in there. Grammar is important. You've got nouns like the word number. You've got verbs like the word catch. You've got adjectives like the word serious. These are words, I mean, if you folks are all English teachers, these are words you know. These are the easy words. And this is a very, very high priority in teaching. Don't teach them the difficult words until they know the easier ones. Then there are words that are just very low frequency. You don't see them very often. So if you're a native speaker of English, or your English is very, very strong, you may know these words. But if you're not a native speaker, you may not, and you may never need to know them either. If you were studying for the graduate record exam or IELTS or something, you might want to learn some fancy words, but we're not there yet. So words like truncate, pretentious, loquacious, corroborate, bilious, and bloviate. If you don't know them, don't worry. It's not that important until you really, really know a lot of English. Beck, you know enough English that you might be interested in these words, but most of our students aren't there, don't need them, and they're not going to see them often enough to really learn them. Then there's another group of words. So we've looked at the high frequency words, the easy ones, the low frequency words, the really, really hard ones. Now we're going to look at something called the academic word list, the AWL. A woman in New Zealand named Avril Coxhead, about 20 years ago, put together a list of 570 words that are found typically in academic texts, but they're not words related to any specific discipline. So it's not like these are mathematical terms or historical terms or linguistic terms. They're just general words that you need to know to get through school. She divided the list into 10 sublists, and each list gets a little less frequent and a little more difficult. So sublist 1 is not so difficult. By the time you get to 10, they're harder. They make up about 9 to 10% of an academic text. So think about it a minute. If you know the entire GSL, that's 2,000 words, that's 80%, and you know the entire AWL, you know 90% of the words on a page. That's still not enough. What else do we need to know? Well, we'll get to that in a minute. Here are some examples of the AWL, the academic word list. At level 1, words like analyze, formula, percent, structure. These are words you need to know to get through school. In the middle level, level 5, compound, fundamental, logic, objective, and list 10, forthcoming, reluctance, persist, straightforward. Straightforward isn't a word that you see every day. That's already a little bit less frequent. So you see they get increasingly less frequent as you go on. Then there are technical words. If you are teaching math or science or history or linguistics or whatever it is, there are certain technical words that your students need to know that other people may not know anything about, and that's okay. So for example, in geometry, acute as in acute angle. Notice that's a nice collocation, acute angle. Circumference, parabola. I actually had to look up the meaning of the word parabola. I couldn't remember what it meant. For physics, words like vector or prism or fission. And in linguistics, syntax, lexicon, phonetics. People who are not students of linguistics may not know the word, what phonetics means or whatever. And people who don't study physics may not know fission. And people who don't study geometry may not know parabola. If you add these technical words to the general service list and the academic word list, then your students probably know enough to read what they have to read. So let's do a little exercise, and this is where my computer skills, we'll see how this works. I'd like those of you out there in the audience, write down these 4 groups. Write down the word high frequency in one column, low frequency in another, academic in a third, and technical in the fourth. So we have 4 columns. Then I'm going to give you a list of words and give you a little bit of time and ask you to try to categorize them. Now, I want you to understand that we're not always going to agree because, for example, I may think of a word as technical and you may just think of it as low frequency. That's okay. Don't worry about being perfectly correct. So if you've written down those 4 words, take a look at this list and try in your own mind, think about which words belong in each category, and then we'll look at it.
What were the 4 categories again? High frequency, low frequency, technical, and?
High frequency, low frequency, academic. Words like analyze. Okay?
Thank you.
You're welcome. I'm glad you asked. Beck, you want to give me a heads up of when you think we're ready to go over this?
Sounds good. So I feel like everybody's doing on a piece of paper, looks like. So I don't see any activities in the chat, but you know, let's give them like 30 more seconds probably, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
Yep.
So.
Okay. Would anybody like to unmute and tell me what they think are the easy, high frequency words? Can I have somebody unmute and shout out?
May I?
Women,
Women, yeah.
table,
Yeah.
table, eat,
Yeah.
eat, from, dog,
You got
dog,
it. Those are the 5 words that I put down. Woman, table, eat, from, and dog.
duck. Okay.
Even beginning learners know those pretty quickly. All right, let's look now at the academic words. This is a little trickier. Does anybody want to take a stab at this, at the academic words, the words that aren't discipline related, but could be. What was that? What was that?
Nilufar.
I'm having trouble hearing. Say it again.
Nilufar.
Far.
Why am I having trouble understanding? Once more.
Nilufar. My name is Nilufar.
Yeah, she wants to share. Yeah, she wants to share. I'm looking for an academic
word.
Yeah.
Thank you. Please share.
Yeah.
About academic words, yeah?
Yes.
Well, I think democracy.
Okay.
Pyramid. Meta language.
Meta. And what else?
Section.
Fiction.
Response.
Response. Okay, let's stop right here. Remember I said we aren't always going to agree. I think of these words as being much more discipline specific. So if you don't know the discipline, you're right, these are academic, but they're also very technical. So let me show you what I put down, okay? Because I did it a little bit differently. I put down context, because you need to know that word regardless of your discipline. Create, response, policy, and section. Now this is interesting because policy, you could say, well, That's a technical word. If you were a political scientist, for example, policy is, there's an overlap between those two categories. Don't worry about it. If you were teaching political science, you'd know what words to use. Okay, let's look next for technical. If you don't mind, let me do some of that with you. Here's what I put down for technical. And again, some of these could be considered low frequency as well. Noun, because that's related to linguistics, to my field. Vaporize, which is scientific. Meta-language, which is a word we use in linguistics all the time. Pyramid. Now, I put down pyramid because I think of that as being related to history. What if you were a mathematician? You might talk about a pyramid, or just plain old low frequency. Democracy, I think of that as being political science. Okay, so these are very discipline specific, although some of those other words are too. There's overlap there. And finally, the really, really plain old, these are low frequency words: prevaricate, lethargic, contraband, bombastic, and bloviate. You could go your whole life and not know the meaning of these words and do just fine. Your doctor might ask you, do you feel lethargic? That means kind of weak, not having a lot of energy. So these are the last words that you want your students to learn. They're never going to see them often enough to really grasp how they're used. They may never see them again. It's not using your time efficiently to focus on words like these. And that's a mistake that a lot of us make in our teaching because we so want our students to sound educated. They're going to sound educated if they use the words that they do use as correctly as possible. So let's remember, the GSL is about 80% of an academic text. The AWL, the academic word list, is 9 to 10%. Right there, we've got 90%. Add your technical words, and your students have a fighting chance of being able to understand what they're reading in high school, in college, and they'll do better. They'll do better. All right, let's talk about what we do in the classroom. Do you have questions so far, by the way? Okay, so in this part, I want to talk a little bit about Uzbek. Not that I know very much about Uzbek, but let me give it a try. So it's very important that your students understand the parts of words, because these are clues to lots of other words. So if I look at the name of the country, Uzbekistan, I see Bek, and I know that I have a friend whose name is Ulubek, and at home we call him Bek. That's his nickname. So I said to him, Bek, what does Bek mean? And he said it's a high-ranking person, somebody who's got some status. Aha, if your students know that word, that morpheme, that little unit of meaning, every time they see Bek, they've got a clue to the meaning of other words. It's important to teach those things. Then I said, well, Stan, I've seen that before. Uzbekistan and Tajikistan and Kazakhstan. I said, Bek, what does Stan mean? And he said, it means land or country, something like that. So if your students see Stan, they're going to know that means something related to countries. So knowing these word parts is important. Every time I teach, I put words on the board. I point out to my students, oh, what does TION mean? What does this mean? What does that mean? So let's look at English. Uncomfortably. Well, the basic part of the word is comfort, and your students may know the word comfort. Un makes it negative. If they know that un means negative, not comfortable, that's important. We know that ly is an adverb in English. So uncomfortably means done in a way that's not very easy or comfortable. I'm constantly pointing that out to my students, asking them questions about that, and making sure that they understand those parts. Pre-registration, well, that means before. Register, we know what register means. TION makes the word a noun. If my students understand that, they can figure out the meanings of other words. Cardiology, cardio means heart, and LOGY means the study of something. We have words like physiology and biology and astrology, the study of all of these things. Everybody okay? All right, so teaching word parts is an important piece. Here's another thing that I believe in very strongly. Don't teach words at the same time if they are similar either in form or in meaning. So hot and cold, people tend to teach them together. On a cold day, I might teach them the word cold. When I know they know what it means, a little later, let them learn the word hot. Otherwise, they're always going to be mixing them up. Also, look at these two words. These come from Hungarian, and Avril Coxhead, the woman who did the academic word list, used these two words in a webinar, and so I'm borrowing or stealing from her. So look at these. It's consonant, vowel, consonant, vowel, consonant. The two vowels are I and E. They both end in G. Too similar. It's just going to confuse your students. Textbooks always like to teach these words together. I don't. I think there's a better way, and so do many other linguists. So let's look at these words. Would you teach these words together? Crawl, walk, skip, jog, run, dash. They're all ways of moving. Don't teach them all at once. You're just going to confuse everybody. What about expose, dispose, repose, transpose? Don't teach them together. It's just confusing. Glimmer, glitter, glow, gleam, glisten. They all mean sort of the same thing. And if you look them up in the dictionary, you'll go crazy. It doesn't have meaning. What you need to know is how they collocate, okay? Gleaming teeth. That's a good collocation. Don't teach similar words together. That's a really important one to know. So here's some suggestions about helping our students learn words. Linguists like the idea of using vocabulary cards. So I don't know exactly if you have cards like this in Uzbekistan, but you probably have something like this. So I borrowed some words that my daughter used when she was growing up. She's 30 years old now. So on one word, this was for a science class, she wrote the word chlorophyll. And on the other side, she wrote a green substance that combines with sunlight and carbon dioxide to make food. She wrote the word and its meaning. So, book, kto. What she did, and I kind of like the idea, is she color-coded her words. So yellow was science, blue was history. This is Pharaoh, Egyptian kings, and so on. Word cards are good because you've got a few minutes to spare. You have a couple of these cards in your pocket. You take them out, you go through them, and you review it. And what you do is, in the beginning, you just look and you turn it over, you read it, you say it in your head, you go on to the next card. But as time goes on, you can add space to your repetitions. So at first you do it very quickly, then you can wait 5 minutes. Eventually you can wait an hour. And if you keep doing this often enough, the next day you'll still know the words. And if you do it often enough, you'll know them for life. So spaced repetitions. I don't want you to study vocabulary for an hour at a time. I want you to study it for 5 and 10 minutes at a time to solidify your learning. It's important to mix the order of your cards, to do it a little differently each time, because the way our memory works, we memorize things in order. So what happens if you learn these cards in order and then the teacher tested you in a different order? You might not recognize it. So always mix up the cards and keep them simple. A word on one side, the translation or definition on the other side. That's all you need. They're a marvelous, wonderful tool. Something else that we like is vocabulary notebooks. So I brought one kind of a notebook. I like notebooks that have rings on them where you can rearrange the pages, but I didn't have one at home. This is your own personal dictionary. So if I were doing one for Uzbek, I might write the word "ktob," book, and then I might write some collocations, definition, a translation, how to pronounce it. I called Beck yesterday and said, Beck, help me with the pronunciation of these words. And I'd write down the pronunciation. I might put a picture. I know some of you are good at drawing. Sarah's an artist. She would draw the picture. I'm not an artist. I wouldn't. I'd put an example sentence that I know is correct. I'd put down some important collocations. And then at your leisure, you have your own personal dictionary of words that are important to you that you want to work on. So both of these are just really nice tools to share with our students and help them to do something like this. Now, we're often told that we should get meaning from the context. But here's the catch. We don't always have enough context. So if somebody says we had a whosis, now I made up the word whosis, don't panic if you don't know what the word means. It's something that I made up. And then I tested you and I said, well, what's a whosis? Is it a tropical fish, an egg beater, or a leather suitcase? You can't answer that. You don't have enough information. What if I said we had a whosis, but the handle broke? Well, a tropical fish does not have a handle, so that's some context, but I still don't know, is it an egg beater or a leather suitcase? In case you don't know what an egg beater is, guys, I brought my egg beater here. Actually, the handle is stuck. I'm not going to do anything with it. What if I said we had a whosis, but the handle broke, so we had to beat the egg with a fork? Well, it's not a tropical fish, and it's not a leather suitcase. It's an egg beater. Now you have enough context. Don't ask your students to use context if the context isn't there. All right, here's another important point. Very often when we teach vocabulary, we have students write a sentence with the word right away. But as I hope you're beginning to see, to know a word means to know a lot of things about it, to know its connotations and its collocations and so forth. So if we ask students to write that sentence too quickly, we're forcing them to make mistakes. So minute means small. I'm only 4 feet tall, and this is an actual sentence from a student. I am a minute person. Minute doesn't collocate with person. Notice I have that little red asterisk, the star. In linguistics, that means this is not grammatically correct. There's something wrong with it. People aren't minute. Substances are minute. You could have a minute grain of sand or a minute piece of food or something like that, but not a minute person. You have a small person, a short person. Or initial. Initial means first. And one of my own students said, my initial name is Yasmin. Well, her name was Yasmin, but initial doesn't collocate with name. You can have an initial idea, an initial chapter in a book, something like that. So the students just don't know enough to write sentences yet. Don't force that until you really think they know enough. Let's look at some other tools. There's something called a learner dictionary. They're developed by linguists who use computer collections of data. Those are called corpora. And they're really a whole lot better than the more old-fashioned traditional dictionaries. By the way, you can get them online or you can get them in book form. They define words simply, avoiding difficult vocabulary. So in a traditional dictionary, you'd look up the word house and it would say domicile, and you'd say, what's a domicile? And you'd look up the word domicile, and it would say residence, and you'd say, what's that? And by then you'd just say, I don't understand, and you'd give up. Learner dictionaries explain the meanings in simple terms. Excuse me. They usually define words in sentences, which gives you a little bit of context, and that helps you understand. They provide sample sentences. They give information on usage. They often provide pictures, and I know regular dictionaries do sometimes. Learner dictionaries use a lot more pictures. And they give pronunciation, IPA, or International Phonetics Association, which means once you know that system, you understand it. So there are lots of different learner dictionaries. Here's one that I've got, the Collins Co-Build. I like this one because it comes in an advanced, intermediate, and beginner's dictionary, and I really love that. Here's another one, Oxford Dictionary, and I don't care which one you use. I just like learner dictionaries. I don't even use a regular dictionary unless I have to. I prefer learner dictionaries. They're very well done. So some examples are Collins Co-Build, which I showed you, Longman, Oxford, Merriam-Webster, Cambridge. They're all good. Any one of them is good. Then there's something called a collocation dictionary. And here's the one that I usually use, Oxford Collocations. They provide information on what words form good collocations. For example, construction. You can say massive construction, complex construction, a construction project, a steel construction. And when you use words like these, you sound like you know what you're talking about. It's a wonderful, wonderful tool. And again, you can get these online as well as in book form. And I strongly encourage all learners and all speakers of a language to get a learner dictionary and a collocation dictionary. So, some final thoughts. Do brief, focused vocabulary word in each class. Don't spend 2 hours at a stretch doing vocabulary. Do 10 minutes in a class, but do it each time. It builds nicely, like an onion. You build layers of knowledge. Pay attention to vocabulary in all your classes, in reading and writing classes, as well as in speaking and listening classes. Don't teach too many words at once. You find sometimes, oh, here's 30 words to learn. It's too much. I would use 6 to 12 words is plenty. Teach the words before you test people on them. Don't ask them to use them correctly until you've really taught them how to use them correctly. And then test them only on what they've taught you, and what you've taught them. And we so often forget that. I haven't taught them enough to test them. All right, here is a little bibliography. A man named Michael Lewis wrote 3 wonderful books about teaching vocabulary. He's a big believer in collocational knowledge. These are wonderful, wonderful books. The specialist of all specialists in vocabulary acquisition is a man named Paul Nation. And here is his book. It's very, very important in the field of vocabulary acquisition. And a woman named Cheryl Zimmerman wrote a book called Word Knowledge. It's a little bit of it's easier to follow. It's a handbook, and it's got some good exercises in here, which teachers like. And finally, one last thing I want to tell you about. I didn't have enough time today to go into some of the technological aspects of this, besides which I'm uncomfortable with technology. I'll let somebody else do that. But 2 things I want you to know about, 2 URLs that are marvelous. So this is something that one of my colleagues in the philosophy department told me about. If you go to this URL, it's going to ask you to type in a sentence, a paragraph, whatever, and it's going to underline all those low frequency, difficult words. So if you were writing a passage for your students, it's going to say, well, you wrote the word prevaricate, get rid of it. You wrote the word bloviate, too difficult, get rid of it. It's easy to use, and it's really useful, particularly if it's not your native language. This is hard stuff to learn. And for those of you who want to go more deeply into this field, There's a marvelous suite of tools called the Complete Lex Tutor. Notice complete is spelled in an unusual way, and that was done intentionally so that you wouldn't get confused when you go through the list of all the words spelled complete. It's a whole bunch of tools. It's going to give you tests for vocabulary and help you analyze vocabulary. And if anybody's interested in going further, I'm happy to share information with you one-on-one, with Zoom, with whatever. I love this stuff. I'm going to stop here, and I'm going to ask you all if you have questions, and I thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Teddy. Thank you so much.
I'm seeing more familiar faces. I'm grinning from ear to ear. Thank you.
So it was super informative, and a lot of people are writing on chat. They're expressing their gratitude for your webinar, for the information. So people are expressing their gratitude, their thanks, and they found it very, very informative webinar. So
thank you.
Nodropa, do you want to add something? Or anyone has any questions?
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much, Teddy. It was really informative, and I really loved, when you were personalizing the examples and bringing in examples from the Uzbek language.
That was the most fun of all.
Yes, so we really appreciate that. Yes, thank you so much.
Thank you.
I think Kathy has a question, right, Kathy?
Kathy?
Yes.
Hi,
thank
Kathy.
you, Teddy.
Welcome.
I love the idea of how you said when you teach a word, teach them the spelling, the pronunciation, the base word, the suffix, prefixes, and all that. I love that idea, and I think we should, as a teacher, we should teach that. But in my reading class, there are so many vocabulary words that we need to teach them. I mean, there are just so many, and I get overwhelmed. My students tell me this is so much, and I just try to teach them the definition and how to use it. But for me to teach them the connotation, the collocation, the grammar that goes with it, like, do I need to do that for each vocabulary word, or how do I choose which one?
You can't do it all, Kathy. You really can't. That's why the repetition is so important. I'm a firm believer when we teach vocabulary, ask your students to pronounce the word. They need to get the feel in their mouths. And that's controversial. There are some people who will say, no, that babies them. You can't do that with adults. You're not going to learn the word as well unless you know how to pronounce it correctly. You don't do it all. You add to it slowly, very slowly. I wish if I could change one thing, well, there are a lot of things I'd like to change, but one of the most important things is we shouldn't be forcing learning so many words at once. We should focus a little bit more on depth as well as just knowing lots of words. That's out of your control. So no, you can't do that with everything. Focus on a few words and give them a little bit more depth on a few words. And then the others, you explain to them and you move on. That's the best you can do. My dream is to change the way everybody thinks about this, so students wouldn't be, and teachers wouldn't be forced into unnatural ways of teaching and learning. It's too much to learn 30 words today and 30 words tomorrow. Learn 6 words this week in depth. And slowly over time, it builds up. For those of you who live in North America, it's like a snowball. You continually add. You're not going to teach all the meanings of a word. You're going to teach the word the way it's used in their reading and maybe what the core meaning is. And then over time, oh, they see the word again in a new context. They'll add that later on. It can't all be done at once. Yes, it's overwhelming.
Thank you, Teddy.
Thank you. Good to see you again, Kathy.
So thank you so much for the question, Teddy. I actually looked at a couple of questions and I made note of them. I will send them to you after the presentation. But when the presentation is over. There are a couple of people ask questions like what kind of activities we have to use when we introduce new words. Should we pay attention to the pronunciation, right? I mean, you addressed all of them in your webinar. But, there is one question by a attendee called Laurent. So what she's saying is that, so good evening there. I have problem. I always learn new words, but I can't use them during my speaking. What should I do? Please give me your opinion. I mean, give me some advice. So basically, she remembers words, but every time she has to speak, right, she has a hard time using those words. So what are some of your suggestions?
Well, two things. First of all, I'd be happy to send some materials about different kinds of activities that are useful. I mean, I have handouts on all this. If anybody wants to contact me directly, I'm happy to share them with you. Linguists make a distinction between receptive knowledge and productive knowledge. So receptive knowledge is knowledge that we know something about the word, but we're not comfortable using it yet. So I know that Beck means an important person and Stan means a land or a country, but I'm not going to go using words I don't know enough. So receptive knowledge comes first, okay? Depending on the situation you're in, let's say you're an English teacher and your knowledge is really rather advanced, but you don't know everything. None of us knows everything. So what you do is you practice a little bit, you try it out, you ask somebody who knows more English than you, maybe a native speaker, does that sound right or not? And it's just practicing through time that you get it. It's much more challenging to use language productively. It takes many, many usages before you get comfortable. When we teach vocabulary, it's nice when students see it used in different contexts, used through reading, used through speaking, in all of those various contexts. So if they read it, it's nice if they can see it as well as hear it, and then try to use it. And it's just, it's a lifelong process. None of us learn more quickly. Sad to say.
Yeah, exactly. But one thing we know that vocabulary is one of those things where the rich get richer. Okay.
That's right. The more you know, it helps you to learn other words.
Okay. Any other questions? Yeah. So Teddy, a lot of people are expressing their gratitude to your talk, and they've learned a lot. And so it was very nice of you to share your email address. So some people might directly contact you. So wait for your inbox.
Hesitate. Don't hesitate. I'm happy to work. I love this stuff. I really do. Happy to share.
May I ask a question, please?
Please go ahead. Introduce yourself and go ahead.
I'm Nilüfer Kurbanova. Nowadays, I am a M8 graduate student at Webster University in Tashkent. And vocabulary is my majority. I'm very interested in vocabulary, teaching vocabulary, especially as a foreign or a second language. Nowadays, in my methodology, for 10 years, I have been using for example, as other skills such as listening and reading or receptive skills. Usually on one topic, we use, for example, if we practice just one topic on vocabulary, such as sport, we do our practice involves in firstly on that topic listening and reading, and after that as productive skills we use writing and speaking. Is it the correct way to teach vocabulary? What do you think? I'm just going to learn to get to know this.
I like to see skills intertwined. Each one bootstraps on the other. Each one helps the other. Seeing it first, hearing it first can be very useful to do it that way. But they all intertwine. They really, really do. Each one helps the other. Does that answer the question or no?
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah. Any other questions? The last question, probably, if you guys have any questions. Or...
Yes, can I ask? Yeah, I got a question on YouTube. So people, somebody's asking. So some audiobooks are now been promoting the idea of learning words by listening. So, you know, by not just writing down, but they're saying, so that it's possible to acquire words just by listening. I guess this is, you know, repetitive listening. So what do you think about that and about this approach?
It's a good question. I'm a believer in all of the skills coming together if possible. It's not always possible. Each student learns a little differently. Actually, for me, listening is probably the hardest skill, okay? But not everybody is like that. Lots of people say, oh, I understand everything I hear, I just can't produce it. And it depends for me on the language. Some languages I do understand, but I can't produce. Other languages I can produce better than I can understand. So it's going to depend a little bit. There are some languages that I work on now only through reading for many reasons, and I find it satisfying. I love to read. So it's a very individualized thing. When possible and when it's useful, I like to see the skills all combined. You don't know the complexity of the language just by listening. You do have people who are what we call heritage learners. So perhaps they're in the United States, their parents were born in another country, and at home their parents speak a language that is not English, and the kids understand almost everything, but they don't speak very well. I'm actually a heritage learner of my parents' first language. I understand a lot. I don't speak very well. It's certainly better being a heritage learner and having good listening skills, but I wish I could produce better as well. It's always in my mind, it's always best to have all the skills. And if you can't, you focus on the ones that you need. When I was in graduate school, we had to learn to read French. I don't speak French. I took a course where I learned how to read French. I can read French. I can't do anything else with French. I don't understand it when I hear it. I certainly can't speak it. It's always nicest if you can have all the skills. Others?
Yeah. So I think.
Thank you, everybody. It's been an honor. It's been so much fun. And to see my old friends again. Wow.
Yeah. I felt like it was also like, I was actually jokingly saying to, Audrey, that it was sort of a reunion almost,
Yeah, it's a reunion.
and also collaboration, right? Colleagues from Uzbekistan, colleagues from the US, right? We've never met. So sort of joining and seeing new names, and also reunion within the NEIU's TESOL program. And although I can see that only Sarah and I are representing Northeastern Illinois University's TESOL program, Sarah? I mean, we have to, let others know. Just teasing.
There are a whole lot of people here from Northeastern, and
I know, that's what I mean. So maybe in our next talk. Thank you so much, Teddy.
Thank you
for this amazing talk. And as Nodropa was mentioning, that some people asked whether this talk will be uploaded on YouTube. Yes, right, Nodropa? It's going to be.
Yes. It is on YouTube already. So because some people had difficulties, so I had went ahead and streamed online. So I am going to put it there. So for people, if they want to access it. Thank you so much for first of all, Ulugh who made this possible, for being this layout.
I didn't do anything. I was just here.
Yes, he's been doing lots of service to the Uzbekistan community and doing his huge contribution to the professional development of teachers in Uzbekistan. And thank you for our colleagues from different parts of the world, right? And specifically, Teddy, thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Teddy.
Then we'll
Thanks
call
for
it
Bye, everybody.
bye.
Bye-bye.